called James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by acknowledging again the hard work of the public servants and the negotiators who have put a lot of time and effort over the last many years into concluding this deal. Regardless of what we think of the deal, I think that they deserve all recognition for the hard work that they've done on behalf of the country. I also wanted to acknowledge again Mark Mitchell in his role as the Select Committee Chair, who gave a great deal of time to opposition concerns about, most particularly, the investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms and concerns from the public around those and other concerns to do with that. So I do appreciate the process. I think it's been a good process that's got us here today for the most part. One of the things that I keep coming to is that we have a series of concerns about a number of the measures that are contained or in fact not contained inside the Korean Free Trade Agreement that are, in the words of the Minister earlier, in the context of general trade policy, which are showing up here in this agreement and also in other agreements, both that we've already signed and ones that we're currently negotiating. I'd like to respond to Mr. Shearer's concern that the Green Party has a high bar for signing trade agreements. It is true that we have high standards around these, and that so far we've not seen a trade agreement that yet meets those standards. One of the things that we have a real concern around is that a number of these agreements, while they have language around, for example, human rights, labour standards and environmental standards, that those conditions are non-binding and they're non-enforceable. For example, I think somebody referred to the ASEAN agreement earlier today, and that does have some language in there about environmental standards, but the Commission that's supposed to meet to discuss those has actually never met in the entire time that the ASEAN agreement has been in place, but trade has obviously continued. So I want to give an example. We have a free trade agreement with China. And that has led to a huge increase in trade between our two nations. That has led to material benefits to New Zealand and to China, although obviously it's a bit of a drop in the bucket for China. In China, there is a small city called Baotou, which is in Inner Mongolia, not terribly far from the country of Mongolia. Near Baotou is a tailings lake, which is 11 square kilometres. The background radiation of that lake is 3 times the normal background radiation, which itself is already very high. The lake contains 180 million tonnes of fine waste powder from ore processing. It includes a whole series of different ores, but notably cerium, cerium oxide and neodymium. Now, those are rare earth metals that are necessary for a number of things that we hold to be particularly important. It includes batteries, it includes lasers, magnets that are used for a whole series of industrial processes, but in particular, notably, in wind turbines, a clean green technology, and also in electric cars that we're hoping to see on our roads before too long. And it's also those metals are also used in catalytic converters. So what is happening is that in our trade with China, and one of the other things that it's used for is the covers on our iPhones, so the touchscreen glass on our iPhones. So it's an incredibly common, virtually everybody has some of this product in their pockets now as a result of these industrial processes. And it is an absolute ecological catastrophe in Baotou. Now, Baotou is only one of a number of tailings lakes throughout China, but it is certainly one of the largest ones. And in our agreement with China, there is some language around environmental standards and so on. And yet, we are encouraging these industrial processes to cause massive ecological catastrophes, and we are not holding ourselves to the standards that we say are already contained inside these agreements. So until that kind of language in these agreements becomes binding and enforceable, where there is some mechanism where we have some recourse to say, look, we think these are great products. We're very grateful for this trade. We obviously we like our iPhones. We like them cheap. We like our electric cars. We like our wind turbines. But is there a way that we can ensure that the production of the components and all of those things is a great deal cleaner? What we have to take responsibility for is that when we buy those components in, when we buy those iPhones and those electric cars and so on and so forth, what we are doing is we are encouraging a massive ecological catastrophe in the lands where those things have come from. And I'm not just talking about China. I mean, it's particularly bad in China at the moment, but all throughout the world where we have trading relationships or indirect trading relationships through the global supply chains that supply all of these products that we buy in. So these are amongst our concerns, and we kind of restate these every time one of these agreements comes up in front of the House, and they never get addressed. Now, one of the things that I am encouraged by are the rumours that the TPPA may actually include for the first time ever some binding and enforceable language around environmental and human rights standards. But until we see that, we can't support it. So it's not just about what happens here, but what happens with our trading partners as well. So we understand completely that there are benefits to exporters from the Korean Free Trade Agreement and for other trade agreements. The problem is that the costs associated with the trade and with these deals is not necessarily borne directly by the ones who receive the benefit. So I understand that those exporters who are seeing an increase in trade will be paying their taxes, they'll be paying GST and so on and so forth, and that comes to the Treasury, and then Treasury uses that money to do some of the cleanup of some of the environmental damage that's caused through trade and so on. But it's a very indirect relationship. Another example is the concern that has not yet been addressed about what is the fate of Pharmac under the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We understand that it is being protected, or it is likely to be protected, but that the cost of medicines will still rise because there are going to have to be some compromises made in order to get that deal over the line. Now, the benefit of the TPPA in terms of benefits to exporters, we understand is going to be reasonably limited from what the Prime Minister is now saying. But the costs won't be borne by exporters. The costs will be borne by consumers of medicines, particularly very rare medicines that come at high expenses. And so when we look at the balance of benefits and costs in these, you can say, yes, there are some benefits to the country via benefits to exporters, but you're also saying on the cost side that the people who are bearing the costs are not the same people necessarily who are receiving the benefit. And so they're being borne in different places. They're not related to each other. And so those concerns, we have stated those a number of different times, and one of our problems is that while those concerns have been heard at Select Committee and so on, we haven't actually had a response other than sort of warm words that are, well, we don't really need to worry about it because we've never been faced with an ISDS thing in the past, for example, but we know that there has been an exponential increase in those cases throughout the world as a result of those agreements. So, when Mr. Shearer says that we are against trade, I reject that notion. We are not against trade. We are, as he says, for trade with standards and high standards. And the problem that we've got is that we haven't yet had an agreement that includes the standards that we're looking for in a way that yet meets our satisfaction. And when we look at cases like the Baotou Steel Group's tailings mine in China and other numerous examples of it around the world, what we know is that while trade is leading to increased wealth and so on and so forth, that there is a tremendous cost, and that those costs are not being borne by the people who receive the benefit, and they're not being cleaned up. And until that time, I'm afraid that we cannot support. Until that time, that agreements include some binding and enforceable standards around human rights, labour and the environment, I'm afraid we just can't support them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.